G'day guys and welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining me. On this episode I go through how I installed reductions on my Holden Jackaroo. It's the AR5 manual 5-speed gearbox. First off I start with the 24mm. I get the fuel plug out and then I take the drain plug out and drain all the oil. Once the oil's drained I chuck the plugs back in and tighten them up so I don't lose them. I take all the plugs off the transfer case and put them up out of the way so they don't get caught up. I then remove the rear tail shaft, the four 14mm nuts, and then took the tail shaft off the output shaft on the gearbox side. The next step I did was to take the shifting knobs off and the gear shift selector surround, all the boots, and then the cover plate as well. I then took out the two bolts holding the selector in for the high-low range, pulled the stick out, and then you have to undo the 4 bolts behind it that hold the shifting assembly. So in line with the high and low shifter, there's two 19mm bolts. You need to get like a long extension down in there, undo the 2 bolts, and then you'll need a magnet to get the 2 springs out and the 2 ball bearings. I then went ahead and pulled the rear of the transfer off, just 14mm bolts, undid them all, and then separated the back of the transfer. I'm not 100% sure, but I think this might be the light that comes on the dash when you go into 4-wheel drive. This is the selector because it's on the front output shaft. Yeah, that's my guess anyway. I'm not 100% sure, so don't quote me. But anyway, you have to take that all the way out. I started by pulling the bearing off the main output shaft. This would expose the 41mm nut behind the bearing. There's a 41mm nut holding the clutch gear on the 2-wheel drive output shaft. So you have to first knock out the locking tab, and then you can get a rattle gun on there with, like I used a screwdriver in one of the notches on the clutch gear and just, ugga-duggered it off. Came off pretty easy. I removed the idler gear circlip, got my bearing puller around the bearing, and then was able to tighten it down and pull that bearing off the idler shaft. Behind all the 3 input shafts and output shafts, there's what's called a snap ring. These things are an absolute nightmare to try and get out. Basically, you got to squeeze them together and pull them. They sit in a channel around the shafts to stop them coming out. So once you squeeze them together and get them out of their grooves, the shafts can move back and forward a lot more freely, and you have a lot more room to actually get the gearing out. With the snap ring removed, I was able to get the output shaft out and the gearing or the clutch pack with it, so that gave me a lot more room to try and get the idler gearing out of the center. The idler gear came out, but I had to manipulate and maneuver it a little bit, but I ended up working around it, and yeah, we ended up getting it out. You can see here the difference in sizing in the idler gear. The reductions is on the right. It's massive compared to the standard. So we're going from a 2:1 to a 3:1, which gives me an extra 50% reduction. Next up, I knocked the pin out for the shaft on the clutch selector, and then replaced the shaft and knocked the pin back through. You just need a pin punch for this, and it comes out pretty easy. One thing to note is the orientation of the shaft. So when you put the new one in, you put it in the same way, and then you just knock the pin back through with a hammer, and yeah, away you go. I'm just removing the circlip for the rear ball bearing. You take that circlip off, then you pull the bearing off, and then you can see that snap ring behind the bearing there. Clean up the new gear with some brake cleaner, get rid of any residue. I swapped over this plate. I'm not sure, it's like a gearing plate. It's obviously spacing something out, so yeah, I used it, and then put it all back together with the snap ring. And you're supposed to probably use a press to press the bearing on. I don't have a press, so I ended up just using a hammer and hammering it around in a circle motion, and seemed to work out alright. I put a socket over the top of it, and then just to hit it home. When the bearing's home, you'll see the circlip recess, and then I put the circlip back on, and good to go. Same thing on the other side of the idler gear. Clean it all up with brake cleaner. Get all your parts on. Bearing in. The new idler gear didn't have a circlip. I noticed that's one thing that I was a bit worried about, but there's nothing I could do anyway, so I just went for it. I then moved on to the clutch gear, they call it. Used the bearing puller, pulled the gearing off, and there's like a clutch race, I guess you could say. It's a cover gear, and inside that is the gear that you're changing. Same thing, cleaned it up with brake cleaner, slid the new gearing on, put the cover gear or race gear around and tap that down with a hammer. I just used my rattle gun to put the 41mm nut back on. Once I got the alignment right with the groove mark, I was able to knock the nut tab in and lock it in place. I then tapped the bearing back on, put the circlip back on. So on these outer gears, there's like a groove missing in a couple of teeth. They aligned with the 3 slots or the 3 holes in that main gear. You can see here, just there, yeah, line it up and slides right over. Then I just put the selector back on it. Now at this point in the video, it was getting really late. It was about 7:30 at night. I couldn't see anything, but basically I don't think I got it on film, but basically I had to take that circlip off the front drive output shaft, circlip off, pull the bearing off and pull that gear off. I couldn't actually get the new idler gear in without taking that gearing off because the new idler gear is way too large to be able to just slide in there. So it's the next day here. As you can see, the gear's missing off the output shaft for the front drive. So that's what I was saying, I had to pull it all off. Anyway, got it all off, got the center gear in with the top gear and was able to sort of get that bottom front output shaft gear back on, and you have to tap it in with a hammer. I had to pull it off with a bearing puller. Basically you line it all up, tap it on with a hammer. It's got a spline on it, so you got to be real careful you don't cross thread the splines. There's a ring spacer followed by a big C-clip. I knocked the bearing back on with a hammer, put the circlip back on, gave everything a really good soaking with brake cleaner, and then just turned it over by hand to see if there was any binding or if any of the gearing had any issues, bearings, things like that. But it all went smooth. I went ahead and put the rear cover for the transfer case back on. You have to line up the bearings and the shafts with the housings on the cover. I went ahead and put all the 14mm bolts in by hand and then just tightened them up. Put all the sensors back in and connected all the plugs. Went back into the inside of the car, put the selector back in, the ball bearings, the springs, the 19mm housing bolts. Basically just put all the center console back together, gear shift knobs back on, surrounds and everything. Went back under the car, filled the transfer case up with oil until it started coming out the fuel hole. Put the fuel plug back in, tightened it up. Then I jumped back in the car to test the operation of the high-low shifter. Man, it felt really good, smooth as. I could move it with one finger. And then I took it down to the local park just to see how it was crawling. Well, that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned. The next episode coming out, I'll be down Monkey Gum. I'm filming. There's a whole crew of guys going. They're all going to do 6 stage in some massive rigs. So, yeah, keen to see that one. So, tune in.